Halloween 2 by Jack Martin. Chapter 3. A Haddonfield blue and white screeched to a halt in the middle of the block, as a group of late trick-or-treaters ducked into an alley. There was a witch, a ghost, a ghoul, and a pint-sized version of the devil. They giggled and hid in the shadows, watching. Lumis ran to the car, his coat-tails flapped behind him like wings. "I shot him 6 times!" "What?" groaned Brackett, skeptically as he climbed out. But he had his shotgun cradled in the crook of his arm just in case. "I said I shot him 6 times!" repeated Lumis. His hands jerked in the air, trying to describe what had happened. It was absurd, he knew that. But so was this universe, apparently. Logic was a tool for dealing with only a small part of reality. Still, the question remained, how to persuade a nickel-and-dime constable, while there was time, with anything less than a cram course in metaphysics. He was at a loss. He felt like a child again, trying to convince his father that there was good reason to be afraid of the dark. He heard his own voice ringing in his ears, the hollow tone of it, and came close to giving up. "Let me have the shotgun," he thought, "and the car. I'll find him. It will take too long to explain." But all he could say was, I shot him in the heart, and—" "He can't have gotten far. Come on." "I shot him 6... Face it, Dad," he thought. "Or have you ever heard of quantum physics, the Heisenberg principle, the porridge bird that lays its egg in the air? No, of course not. There are more things in heaven and earth. Do you think your ignorance prevents them from being true? Do you even think? What will you understand?" "Brackett, he's not human." Brackett's face screwed up, as though someone had told him that his underage daughter had just eloped with the town hebephrenic. What would happen next would be one silly-ass piece of business for a grown man to put up with, he was surely thinking. But shit, it has to be done. It's the law. The law, thought Lumis. That's what I'll hit him with. It's his religion. He's hung up on it the way an addict depends on his heroin. Brackett saw the smoking gun still clenched tightly in Loomis's hand. That did it. A moment later the car door slammed and they were burning rubber. The 4 trick-or-treaters waited until the flashing red lights of the police car were gone. Then they continued cautiously along the alley. They made their way past a rotting picket fence, bent trash cans, bundles of cut branches tied like the ends of witches' brooms. One of them stepped down too hard, spitting gravel under his shoe like BB shot against one of the cars. "Shh! Careful! Are you sure this is the shortcut?" A dog barked suddenly and gnashed the air, straining its chain. "This ain't the way, come on!" They turned and dashed off in another direction. The dog relaxed and gave out a last growl as the alley went silent again. Almost silent. Its ears picked up and swept the alley like radar. A tall, very tall trick-or-treater emerged from the shadows. The dog barked furiously. The tall shape sidestepped into a yard and did not move again until the barking dog lost interest. The yard was overgrown and uneven, mined with mounds of garden-variety refuse and discards. An old refrigerator tilted there like a white tombstone. A rusting lawnmower propped against a shed, sections of garden hose coiled and rotting in the spiked grass. Beneath stiff flags of laundry left out and forgotten on the line. A house, a warm orange light in the kitchen window. The tall shape moved toward it. "Harold, you want mayonnaise on your sandwich?" The voice projected clearly through the window, around a fat pumpkin perched on the window sill. It was Mrs. Elrod, she of the sugar cookies and pale eyes. The shape came closer. There was no response to Mrs. Elrod's question. She did not look up, but finished carving a thick slab of ham on the drain board. The pumpkin reflected in the carton of Coke bottles on her counter. 6 orange circles burning in the glass necks, transforming each into a flickering, tapered candle. She put down her ginsu knife and reached for another jar. "How about mustard?" Still no response. The shape waited, blocked from her view by the jack-o'-lantern. The flame burned lower, the carved, slitted eyes squeezing close to the yard and the night outside. The top of the pumpkin and its length of withered umbilical vines sinking and beginning to char like a blackened fuse. "Harold?" She tissed and dragged her slippered feet across the kitchen floor. The living room was dark except for a strobing blue TV screen. She put a tired hand to the door frame and steadied herself as her eyes adjusted. There was Mr. Elrod slumped in his lowboy chair before the TV. His head and shoulders were outlined against the screen, where just now the image of an American flag fluttered in grainy black and white. There were words superimposed over the flag, the last of the titles for this latest movie in Dr. Dementia's 6-hour horror movie marathon. She squinted. Directed by somebody. The lettering threatened to break up into snow on the small screen. GEORGEROMERO, whoever that was. She made out the image of her husband much more clearly now. The mussed hair, the wrinkled roll of his pajama collar under his bathrobe. "Harold, are you asleep again?" "Mister." She stared down toward him. The screen went blank. She stopped. She reached out for the back of the chair. The screen brightened. Now the face of a local news reporter lit up the screen. Beside him at his news desk, a pumpkin grinned broadly. "This is a WWAR news break. Here is Robert Mundy reporting live from the scene." Mrs. Elrod folded her robe closed around her throat, as if feeling a sudden draft in the house. The scene switched to remote coverage. "Moments ago, police informed us that Michael Myers, who fled last night from the Smiths Grove Warden County Sanitarium, is unfortunately tied in with an attack on a young woman." "Oh, Lord," whispered Mrs. Elrod. "It's that Myers boy again. I knew it." Around her, the house settled. Heavy leaves fell on the roof. The refrigerator creaked like the opening and closing of a screen door. Repeating for those of you who just tuned in. The state police have issued an all-points bulletin for Michael Myers, a mental patient who escaped last night from the Smiths Grove Warren County Sanitarium. He is now believed to be at large in Haddonfield. She shrank back into the kitchen, where things were bright and clear. Mr. Elrod had slept through the announcement. "This is Robert Mundy returning you to..." The reporter's voice and face broke up into static. She felt around her for balance within familiar surroundings. She continued to stare dumbly into the living room as the horror movie, now in progress, flicked back up on the screen. Her pale eyes became watery. She could not have seen the television image, a parched graveyard, the stones tilted, the ragged, wiry figure of a man in black, closing the distance across bleak graves with spastic, sleepwalking movements. She crossed herself. "Hey, praying for church, huh?" The voice on the TV was speaking in a sarcastic tone. Then cheap music droned, muffling the dialogue. Mrs. Elrod reached for the unfinished ham sandwich. She would get back to her job and forget what she had just heard. Try to forget it. Her plump fingers found the bread and the meat. At last, she forced herself to turn away from the receding image of the living room, her husband sleeping safely there. She hoped he had not heard any of it. Now there was work to be done. Her hand slid off the cutting board and she looked down. There was a spill on the board. It might have been strawberry jam, except that it was too runny. She held her fingertips to her face. Some kind of syrup? It was peculiar, the way it was on the ham, too. She made an effort to concentrate on what it was in front of her. It was not mustard, it was not mayonnaise, it was not anything she used for sandwiches. It was the wrong color, darker even than her robe. Much darker. It was gluey and red, and Mrs. Elrod screamed. She reached blindly for the knife she had been using, which was no longer there. Next door to the Elrods, a telephone rang. The dog was barking. In fact, all the dogs on the block were barking now. It spread like a contagion, gaining in volume. A warning signal that quickly became a chorus of mad, guttural barking. It was Halloween, of course. And yet there had been no firecrackers, no rattling trash cans, no giggling children to start the barking this time. Was that a siren that passed quickly and faded in the distance? A young woman came out onto her porch. "Mr. Elrod?" That only made the dogs bark louder. She couldn't hear. It had been a siren or... "Mrs. Elrod?" She stopped halfway down the wooden steps to the backyard. "Are you okay?" The dogs quieted as if uninterested in the sound of her voice. Whatever had alerted them had passed by. The blankets left to air out on the Elrod's clothesline flapped in the breeze. She rubbed her arms and shuddered. Unseen crickets took up their singing again in the bushes, sounding the uncertain boundaries of the yard. She went back inside, the whites of her eyes showing. She picked up the phone in the dining room. "Hi. What's wrong?" "There was someone screaming next door." "What?" "Yeah, Mr. and Mrs. Elrod's. It's his wife's always picking on him. He probably got angry and decided to start beating her." She said it coolly, as if describing an everyday occurrence, but gooseflesh rose on her arms. "God, I hate nights like this." The voice was hollow in the phone lines. It was coming from only a few blocks away, but in that short distance it gained a false electronic vibrato. "You know it's the full moon." "No kidding." "No. Your folks home?" "They," she announced, a self-indulgent smile curling her lips. "They're gone." She straightened her white blouse in the dining room mirror, tried tucking it into her jeans. "My dad had to take my Aunt Ruby to Hardin County, and my mother decided to go along." Idly, she picked up a carving knife left from dinner and examined it without really seeing, almost fondling it. "Did you hear?" "Hear about what?" "This girl got killed in Haddonfield. It was all over the radio." "Hold on." She set down the knife and turned on the radio. "There have been reports of at least one violent attack tonight by the escaped mental patient. A teenage girl was found minutes ago in the upstairs of a Haddonfield residence." "I can't believe it," said the girl. She glanced warily at the windows, but they were black as the night except for the detached reflection of a Halloween pumpkin's mordant grin floating suspended in the shiny darkness. "I know," came the voice on the telephone. "You know, we probably knew her." "Where did it happen?" "Down on Orange Grove." "That's right down the street." "I know." "Sally, I can hear the sirens coming. Do they know who it was?" "No." The boards in the front room floor creaked. She jerked around nervously. The sirens, the dogs barking, howling like wolves. The glass panes in the window over the sink shivered, trembling like membranes. The reflection of a pumpkin appeared to swell unrecognizably, then disassembled into twin circles that resembled animal eyes watching her. She blinked and rubbed her face. The glass subsided into flat panes. Her own breathing came back to her, magnified in the mouthpiece. She tapped the receiver with her nails. She yanked her shirt tails out of her jeans again, watching the mirror image of herself posing in the glass. Something was still not right. There was a thump behind her in the living room. "Oh, God!" she said. She dropped the phone. She went to the dim archway that opened on the living room. She glanced back uncertainly at the telephone, its coiled cord dangling. She looked ahead into the living room, where only a plastic pumpkin was clearly visible. The front door stood open. "Who is it?" She left the phone and took a step, 2 steps into the other room. She stopped. Nothing moved. The pumpkin light wavered on the walls, expanding, contracting. There was a breathing in the room that was not her own. She closed the collar of her blouse around her neck and cleared her throat. "Is anybody—" she began. Before she could finish, her voice was cut off. The words bubbled in her mouth, below the startled whites of her eyes and above the clean white cotton of her shirt front, which was suddenly splashed with tiny red polka dots. The cut came swiftly from behind, clean and deep and straight across, so that the blood shot out in all directions from the extra mouth that now opened below her chin, spattering her face and eyelashes and hair as well as her white shirt with a hissing, pumping spray that covered several feet of carpet and furniture before the shape released her and let her sink down to the floor. It stood over her with its head cocked to the side like a dog's, its flat, dead eyes unblinking behind the pale and featureless Halloween mask. Then it stepped over her body and through the door. Her lips were still twitching, trying to form a scream. "Circle the block again!" "How long now?" Sheriff Brackett pulled the wheel hand over hand, and the squad car squilled around another corner. In the green light from under the dashboard, his face was stony and reptilian. Lumis checked his watch with eyes that shone fiercely in the unnatural light. "It's been about 30 minutes. His head tugged to one side. "Put the light there by those trees," Brackett obliged with his handheld spotlight. The beam swept the front of a home, a tree strung with a roll of toilet paper. "There's nothing." "Well, keep going!" Lumis sucked in his breath and suppressed what he wanted to say. "You know, Doctor," said Brackett tightly, "I'm just about there." Lumis shot an impatient glance at him. "What?" "The point where I stop taking orders from you." Was that a threat? I don't have time to play games with him, thought Lumis. Let him think what he likes. Lumis dropped open the chamber of a gun and began reloading. "All right, Sheriff, whatever you want. The primary concern is that we stop him." "You let him out." It was an accusation. So that was his game, assigning the responsibility. Of course. Let him, thought Lumis, if that will ease his mind, if that's what keeps him going. "I didn't," said Lumis automatically. His own goddamn doctor. "I didn't let him out." My pride made me say that, thought Lumis. I'm letting him play on my guilt. Why? Why does it matter what this man thinks of me? Lumis jumped several inches as the two-way radio squawked. Brackett snatched up the microphone. "Who is it?" Static. "Say again, what is it?" The voice on the other end cleared as they passed under high-voltage wires. "Hunt! Where are you?" "Out by the bakery, moving north on Scottsville Road." "Get the hell back into town, come up 17th Street and meet me at the bypass." As Brackett hung up, Lumis swung the gun closed. Brackett turned on him. "Will you put that thing away, Lumis?" Lumis held the gun and stared out the window. "You couldn't have shot him 6 times. It's just... you couldn't have," Brackett informed him. "You think I'm lying, Sheriff?" It was not a question. "I think you missed him. No man could take 6 slugs." Lumis bristled in spite of himself. "I'm telling you, this is not a man." Brackett's expression changed to open derision. His thin lips opened to speak. His eyes left the road. "Look out!" Lumis all but reached over to jog the wheel. "Slow down!" "What?" said Brackett. "All right, over there. Look, look, look!" It was hard to make out through the clear half-circles in the windshield. 4 trick-or-treaters. Brackett sighed. Lumis waved his finger. There, farther up the sidewalk, emerging from under a street lamp, a tall figure in black, with the pale, almost featureless Halloween mask over his head, walking steadily a few yards behind the children, patiently tracking them. Brackett took his foot off the gas. "Is it him?" "I don't know." Lumis leaped from the car. "Get back!" he yelled to the children. They looked at him and giggled. "Run!" shouted Lumis. "Come on, run!" "Lumis!" called the sheriff angrily. "Get back!" He kicked the children past him and spread his legs in a defensive stance. "Lumis!" shouted the sheriff as the pistol was raised. Lumis heard the car brakes, the slamming of the door, running feet. He refused to take his eyes from the tall shape. 2 of the children were now safely past him, but the other 2, he couldn't get a clear shot. And now the shape turned in its tracks and started walking away in the opposite direction. Lumis cocked the gun. "Stop! Lumis!" The tall shape crossed the street. The sheriff came running as Lumis stepped into the street. The black-coated figure blended into the shadows. There, a flash of a pale rubber skin, the grotesque tuft of colorless hair sewn to the top, the deliberate, unstoppable gait. Lumis braced himself in the middle of the street. He was getting away. "Don't shoot!" yelled Brackett. There was something else moving on the other side of the street. Was it children? An onlooker? Lumis hesitated, afraid he might miss. The shape kept walking. Lumis turned further, drew a bead on the exact center of the head. Before he could squeeze the trigger, he was blinded. Bright white lights flared into his eyes. Through glare he saw the shape, still walking. A car finished its turn. At the last instant, its headlights swept the figure in black. The car swerved and braked. Too late. It was a patrol car. With an ear-splitting screech like 1,000 fingernails scraping over a blackboard, the car scooped the shape up onto its hood and continued to brake, skidded, and plowed headlong into a line of parked cars. There was the smell of burning rubber, and then sparks shooting upwards like a corona around the collision. The sharp scent of gasoline, and then the bursting roar of the explosion. Lumis staggered back in the force of the shockwaves, his skin and the gun in his hand suddenly reflecting bright orange as a fireball rolled into the sky. Then black smoke and the crackle of flames. From within the car, a scream. Then a deputy kicked open a door and lurched out. His uniform was smoking. Lumis watched Brackett run to the figure trapped between the cars, but it was too late. The burning became a blast furnace, forcing Brackett back in its terrible light. Lumis stood transfixed as the tall shape burned black, trapped between the cars. He didn't make a sound, thought Lumis. He never has. Even as it burned, it remained upright. It might have been held that way between the smashed bumpers, but Lumis knew better. He came out of nowhere," said the deputy. "I couldn't stop." "Was it him?" It burned to a crisp, popping and sizzling as the mask melted away to reveal the glowing skull beneath. It burned until there was nothing left but a twisted scarecrow, its arms fiery matchsticks. Still Lumis watched, his face flushed and sweating in the heat of the conflagration. Never changed from its expression of grim, humorless satisfaction. He lowered the gun. It swung hot and heavy against his leg. Then a wind caught the flames and the smell blew over him. He turned aside and retched. "Was it him or not?" shouted Brackett. Lumis did not bother to answer. "This is the moment," he thought, "that I've been waiting for. Nothing else matters." Another patrol car roared up. Another deputy rushed to join them. "Lee!" "You're too late, Hunt." Brackett stared with Lumis at the carnage. Lumis felt contemptuous eyes on him. "Lee?" Patrolman Hunt tried again. "They found 3 bodies." "Where?" Brackett spun around. "Across the street from the Doyle's house." Hunt's voice broke. 3 kids." Brackett spat in Loomis's direction. The patrolman waited. "Lee?" he said. His voice was hesitant, almost kind. "Lee, one of them was Annie." Before Hunt could say anything else, Brackett ran to the patrol car and slammed the door. The patrolman followed and got in next to the sheriff. Lumis went for the back seat. It wasn't over yet. The fallout from tonight would last a long time. Perhaps for the rest of all of their lives. There were the survivors to worry about. For them it would never be over. And those who didn't survive, it would not make the rest of the night easy. There would be a lot of stories to tell, lives to unravel. Perhaps even the burden of some new patients now. Maybe even someone like Brackett. The more rigid the personality, the more complete the break. It happened that way sometimes. He did not look forward to it, but he wanted to know it all. He considered it his personal responsibility. As they sped away, Lumis gazed numbly out the back window. The 4 children in trick-or-treat costumes were huddled together, watching animately. It should be a moment of celebration, he thought. If it were spring, this would make a wonderful feast of Beltane. But it was too late. Far too late. Okay, Slashaholics, this has been Chapter 3 of Halloween 2, the novelization by Jack Martin. Hope you guys are enjoying the book so far. I sure know I am. I really enjoyed Chapter 3. I love the back and forth between Lumis and Brackett. I thought the death scenes and the stock scenes were handled very well with Michael. The whole wreck thing played out pretty good, very descriptive with the explosion and everything. You know, the red herring, as it were, now that Lumis and them think that Michael is dead. So they're going to be handling things different than they would if they thought he was still out there. Of course, we know the hospital's coming up in the story if the book sticks to the movie, and that's where things get really interesting. So I'm looking forward to that. And I really love the interaction in the movies between Michael and Lumis, and I hope that the book has plenty of that in it. Because it seems like the first book didn't have enough of that, like the movies did. But I'm looking forward to that. Hope you guys are looking forward to it as well. I'll be back very soon with more of this book. The chapter was brutal, though. I mean, we had 3 deaths tonight. 2 of them were left to our own imagination, but hey, nothing wrong with that. And, you know, the sheriff just found out about Annie. So, yeah, that's going to be real interesting going forward. Let me know, guys, what you thought of the chapter in the comment section below, what you think of the book so far, and your expectations for the book going forward. Things you might hope could be added to the story that weren't in the movie. Things like that. As always, tonight's upload was brought to you by our patrons on the Patreon page. That's Carl Eakins, Catherine McClear, Sean Campbell, Cecilia Spears, Hawaii, Iron Alexa, and our newest patron, Allison Seib. Thank you guys so much for supporting the channel on Patreon. And to all you listeners out there, if you enjoy what this channel's doing, making all these out-of-print, hard-to-find books available here in audio form for the world to enjoy, and you would like to help support the channel so I can keep this channel going and growing for years to come, then click that Patreon link below, sign up for as low as $2 to $5 per month. You get some great rewards for doing so, some early access to certain stuff. For example, on the Patreon right now, I'm releasing weekly chapters of Halloween 3, the novelization, for the movie Season of the Witch. Also written by Jack Martin. That novelization is, just like this one. And a little tidbit for you, Jack Martin is actually a pseudonym of the author Dennis Etchison. Great author. Anyways, guys, until next time, this has been your friendly neighborhood 80s slasher librarian saying, thanks for listening. Have a great night. I'll see you soon.